After analyzing the history of the U.S. Supreme Court, one informed observer says it could easily be called
pretty horrible. The Supreme Court for almost all of American history has been a foe.
Ian Millhiser is a legal analyst at the Center for American Progress and author of Injustices, a book about the Supreme Court's history of anti-worker rulings. Millhiser says at one point the court was out to
make life worse for ordinary Americans to the benefit of people who are pretty well off.
One section of Injustices reviews what Supreme Court scholars call the Lochner Era, a troubling time period that started in 1897 and lasted 40 long years.
The Supreme Court struck down minimum wage laws, it struck down child labor laws, it struck down laws limiting the number of hours that workers could be forced to work at a time when workers were sometimes working 18-hour days and 120, 130-hour weeks. It struck down laws protecting the right to unionize and basically said to workers that you are on your own.
The Lochner Era takes its name from a 1905 landmark legal case called Lochner versus New York, where the court ruled in favor of a bread bakery sweatshop. Shockingly, the court believed horrendous working conditions at the business were protected under the Constitution.
The floors were often just dirt or they were rotted through. There were rats. There was one case where in the bathroom the entire wall was black because it was covered in cockroaches. There was raw sewage dripping from pipes in the ceilings. And by the way, this was the ceiling above the tables where the workers were making the dough that was cooked into the bread. And it was hot because there was this blaring oven that was cooking the bread. So they were working these infernos. They had to stoop over because the ceilings were so low. They were working these impossibly long hours. And on top of that, many of them were forced to sleep on the very tables where they were kneading the bread, and they had to pay rent for the privilege to sleep on that table. So they would wake up, they would be at their workstation when they woke up. They would then spend 18-hour days making bread in these, pungent infernos.
Fortunately, law and order would begin to be restored in 1937, when the court bucked its anti-labor reputation by ruling in favor of a shortchanged worker in Washington state who sued for a higher minimum wage. But Millhiser says the Supreme Court's recent tilt to the right could signal a reemergence of a Lochner era-like ideology.
Things are going to get really bad in the Supreme Court. I mean, I think that a lot of people don't understand how bad things are about to get.
By 2019, the court will have at least a 5-4 majority in favor of justices who share an anti-labor ideology. Case in point, Clarence Thomas, whose draconian interpretation of labor law includes
we should go back to the world where the federal government isn't able to regulate child labor.
And when it comes to federal laws that protect workers, Justice Gorsuch believes
and the government has very limited ability to regulate the relationship between a worker and their employer or some other contractual relationship. I mean, Gorsuch is really bad. I mean, Gorsuch may be the worst justice we've seen on the Supreme Court since the 1930s.
Jeffrey Shapiro is a Machinist Union Local Lodge president who represents federal workers in Florida. He's already seen this anti-labor Supreme Court in action. In June of 2018, the court ruled that public employees do not have to pay fees to unions to cover the costs of collective bargaining. And if the court continues this anti-labor trend,
we're going to have people who can't have good wages, people who can't buy homes, people who can't buy cars, people who don't have the ability to have vacations and benefits and health care. These are all things, as a collective, we unionists fight for.
I think we're going to see an acceleration of the attack on workers' rights that we've already seen from this Supreme Court, both the attacks on the right to unionize.
And for those of you who think this is a scare tactic, haunted hype, or hysteria, Millhiser warns.
Unfortunately, I think that the way that people are going to realize how dangerous the Supreme Court has become and the way that they're going to realize how precarious their rights are is that the Supreme Court is going to take those rights away and they're going to feel it.
As the Supreme Court looks to wage an ideological war against working people, a resurgent ground game is giving unions the gift of hope. Labor's strong grassroots network is poised for a fierce fight, a battle based on political education, organizing rank and file, and pushing for progress in the nation's capital.
We have to voice our opinion. We have to promote ourselves in every way possible and get out to the American people.
The powerful, who are now represented by the Supreme Court, are going to give away nothing without a fight. And we're not going to get anything from them without a fight. So I think it's time to be aggressive and time to take the fight to them.
It is going to get bad, and I hope that when it does get bad, people are ready to mobilize and people are ready to do what it takes to make sure that we still have a democracy.